Firstly, let me say that I'm an educated man who works in the medical field at our trauma hospital here in Montana. The other witness is a deputy sheriff. Both of us are in our mid-30s, married and have children. Neither of us, however, drink, use drugs, or in any way were incapacitated during the time of this sighting. I would also be relevant to tell you that I grew up in Washington State, where I spent countless summers camping, hiking, and enjoying the outdoors. My good friend grew up in Oregon and spent a great deal of time hunting, camping, and recreating in the outdoors. We both now live in Missoula, Montana, and have never heard the sounds like we did last night, on January 23rd, 2005. My buddy and I returned from our coffee at Barnes & Noble. He was dropping me off in my driveway, near around 9 p.m. The moon was pretty full last night, and it was cloudless, so visibility was great. Behind my new home, which sits on nearly 2 acres, is a large hill that descends on the other side to a partially wooded area in a canyon where deer are seen just about all the time. The heavier, more dense forest starts less than a mile away, and in fact heads into the mountains. As we conversed in my driveway, the complete silence was broken. The silence was broken by this god-awful howl, growl, or moaning that echoed throughout the entire valley. The volume was overwhelming, and immediately, my dog, as well as multiple dogs on the road, began barking and almost seemingly panicked. Now, please, let me tell you that we got elk, deer, bear, and mountain lion around here pretty consistently, but never any reaction from the dogs, not like this. We went behind my house, where my dog was no longer barking, but instead, just shivering, and now looking up at the hill, just as it did it again. The sound is so incredibly similar to the howl you have. A third series of growls, and let me tell you, they were deep and extremely loud, soared across our neighborhood. I let my dog have refuge in his fenced-in kennel, where he retreated to his doghouse. My dog is a year-old lab who has grown up exposed to many wild animals. We waited, but the noise finally stopped after 1 to 2 minutes. We both commented on how the hair on the back of our necks were sticking up, and that neither of us had heard anything like that before in all of our years. My friend left, and I headed into the house, where I felt compelled to load hollow point slugs into my shotgun, and for nearly 30 minutes, I noticed my dog staring up on the hill, but did not hear another noise for the remainder of the night. There's only one other witness outside, and my wife inside, almost reluctant to talk to the other neighbors, but would probably do so. A follow-up investigation report was filed, and reads as follows. I contacted the witness within 1 week of the incident, and discussed it at length on the phone. I followed up with the on-location visit, an interview at the witness's home in Missoula. I found the witness to be absolutely credible, an educated man in the medical field, with personal law enforcement experience as well. As stated in the initial report, the witness has had extensive experience in the outdoors and is very familiar with all local wildlife. In fact, he recalled actually witnessing a grizzly bear take down a calf elk in Glacier National Park, which is a very rare occurrence. The witness accurately related the incident to me in person. He again described the vocalization as the most intense sound he's ever heard. It echoed throughout the entirety of the neighborhood and incited a terrible response from nearly all the dogs in the area. To provide an example of the volume of the sound, the witness's wife, who was in the house with all doors and windows shut, heard it, came out to ask what was going on. The tone of the vocalization was not a scream. It was too deep and bassy, and according to the witness, it sounded pissed off and mad. There were a total of 3 of these growl-like howls, which ended after approximately 2 minutes. The witness discussed the level of fear he felt at the time, which he described as unusual, given his experience as a sheriff's deputy. As stated, he was compelled to load slugs into his shotgun. The night was clear with the hill being illuminated by the light of the moon. One might ask how the witness did not see the source of the vocalization. I discovered it possible upon personally climbing to the top of the hill, to stand on the summit and view the majority of the subdivision without being discernible from the homes directly below the ridge. The witness did not notice any unusual odor during the incident either. The witness's dog, which I encountered on the visit to Missoula, is a rambunctious young lab, just seemingly oblivious to just about anything. It seems significant to me that the dog just sat staring towards the top of the hill during the entirety of the incident, shivering and whining, and ultimately retreating to the safety of its doghouse. Following the incident, the witness began browsing the internet in search of explanations for this uncanny sound. Coming across the BFRO site, he explained to me that the Ohio howl seemed very similar to the sound he heard that night. However, the sounds he heard sounded much more aggressive, intense, and angrier. The terrain surrounding this location is very interesting. The subdivision in which the witness lives is a single street, with homes on both sides running approximately 1 mile parallel with an incredibly steep ridge. The ridge, approximately 350 feet above the street, is bare, covered only in long grass, and the subdivision sits in its shadow in the flat valley below. The ridge, located a mere 25 yards from the back steps of the witness's house, is so steep that it would be nearly impossible to climb straight up. So, one must switch back to reach the summit. The top of the ridge is essentially a plateau, with a very gradual downward slope to the southwest. There is a line of massive steel power poles running the length of the ridge, continuing to the forested mountains directly to the east. One could walk along the line of power poles directly into the nearby forested mountains, about 1 or so miles to the east. An unusual aspect to the hilltop is to its lack of ground cover. One small ravine draining to the southwest contains a handful of pine trees, but the remainder of the hilltop was completely barren of trees and brush. It is the honest opinion of this investigator that the witness did in fact hear an intensely powerful vocalization, and it is extremely unlikely that this sound emanated from any other known animal or source. In mid-July of 2004, I was on my back porch. It faces east, and it faces a mountain that I live in the woods on the side of my house, where the creature was. The house is scarcely wooded, and the land flat. The sun was shining. The reason I went outside is this. My dogs began to bark and run through the house. They got halfway through, and stopped and whined. I thought that was odd, so I went and sat on the back porch. Then, I saw the tree to my left move, and the tree was about 300 yards away, from me, or less. I'm not the greatest with measurements. So, I watched the tree to see what caught my eye. Then I see this creature. It was behind the tree, looking out from behind it. Its head was in the branches, and it was hunching down. Its head was large, and it had a definite brow ridge. I thought I was seeing an orangutan, except it was about 6.5 feet tall. It was moving its head all around the tree to watch me as I stood up to get a better look. Its hair was even a rusty color, like the color of dead pine needles. Its eyes, though, they were haunting, and it was completely silent. It was watching me while I was watching it. So I sat back down. I watched outside for about 6 minutes and did not tell the person on the phone. Then I went in the house, watched through the window to make sure it wasn't a trick of shadow. Then the creature moved in front of the tree, staying hunched over, but watching me in the window. I watched a few more minutes and then went back to the house. When I went back, it was gone. While this was going on, my kids were in the front, playing with water. I think if this creature had been aggressive, it would have made some sort of move. But I deemed it peaceful. At least it seemed that way. It also seemed to be curious. I think it was young, especially to be in such a vulnerable open area. When my husband came home, we went out to the tree, and all the knapweed was completely trampled down under the tree. We didn't find any hair, though. I look every day to see if it's out there again, but to no avail. They had been barking all morning. Before, but that isn't unusual. The weird thing is that they stopped, short and whined. That is very unusual for them. There was a follow-up investigation report filed, and this is what was said. I interviewed the witness directly over the phone, some 9 months after the incident. She recounted the particulars of the event clearly and accurately in accordance with the details of her initial report. I found the witness to be genuine in her discussing of the incident, and believe her to be quite credible. The incident began at approximately 4 p.m. in July of 2004, when her dogs began barking excitedly from inside the house. The witness actually recalls that she was talking to her sister-in-law on the phone as this all began. The dogs ran through the kitchen to exit the house to the backyard via the doggy door. However, upon reaching the dog door, the dogs both stopped suddenly, and the normally aggressive larger dog began to whine. The witness considered this very abnormal for this particular dog. Out of curiosity, the witness stepped outside to see what might be affecting her dogs in this manner. It was a bright sunny afternoon. After scanning the area, the witness described something catching her eye. Upon returning to her gaze to that location, she then saw an animal that she can only compare to an orangutan at approximately 200 to 300 yards away. It was standing on 2 legs, bipedally, but hunched over, as if trying its best to remain hidden, slightly behind a tree. The animal in question was swaying from left to right, as if to see around the tree, seemingly curious about the witness. She describes the animal as completely covered in hair the color of red pine needles. The witness also described the style of hair, that of a golden retriever, wavy and flowing. She estimates the height of the animal at 7 to 8 feet tall, but cannot accurately estimate because the animal was maintaining a hunched posture. Later that day, the witness asked her husband, who is 6 feet tall, to stand in that same position. She claimed the animal, while hunched over, was easily taller than her own husband. She also describes the mass of the animal as very thick. The witness described the eyes as an amber color. They were deep, very set in the face, with a forward brow. She claimed the head to be very large and round. After the incident, she searched the internet for explanations for this event and found the BFRO site. She claims the animal she saw strongly resembles the Gigantopithecus model displayed in a photograph on the BFRO website. The witness also mentioned that there was not a hair around the eye, nor on the brow of the face. The incident continued while the witness stayed on the phone with her sister-in-law. She did not mention anything about what was happening to this person. The witness was indeed stunned by what she was saying, and most likely was not listening to much of the other end of the phone. This particular sighting lasted maybe 5 to 6 minutes. At no time did the witness experience any sense of fear, nor did she notice any unusual odors. At this point, the witness walked to the front of the house to check on the children, who were subsequently playing in an inflatable swimming pool. After checking the children, the witness returned to the backyard and found the animal had departed. After getting off the phone with her then sister-in-law, she called her husband immediately to discuss the experience. He returned to the home shortly thereafter, and they both went to the tree from which the animal was standing behind. It was obvious, based upon the flattened grass and knapweed, that something large had been standing in that exact location. In the 9 months that have passed since this event, the witness and her family have had no other similar sightings to report. When asked about any unusual sounds in the area, the witness did describe one such event. She described a scream they heard in the spring of 2004. It sounded garbled and reminded her of a young mountain lion screaming. However, the sound emanated from a significant distance, the capacity of which is not normally suggestive of a mountain lion. It has been a while since this incident happened, in 1989, but I remember it well. The incident occurred during the summer of '89. I was working in my father's woodshop when my older brother, who was 19 at the time, burst through the door. He was nearly out of breath and very distraught looking. He immediately demanded that I come outside right now. I asked him what was wrong, but he just said, "Come out here now, quick." I hurriedly followed him outside. It was late afternoon, and the sun was just beginning to wane in the deeper parts of the forest. I asked him what was the matter. He told me to shush, and just said, "Listen." I could hear that our grandparents' dog was going berserk, and I could also recognize the bark of our dog in the distance as well. I asked my brother what was going on with the dogs, and if they were fighting again. He said, "Shh, not the dogs, listen." We were both silent, but I didn't hear anything. I asked him what I was supposed to be listening for. He said he heard something really weird, really freaky. I asked him what it sounded like. He said he couldn't really explain it, that it just sounded weird. I told him that maybe he heard a mountain lion, as I had heard them on several occasions. They make a really strange sound, like an inhuman woman screaming bloody murder. He said it didn't sound like a scream, though. He took off running down the road, towards our grandparents' house, calling for me to follow. I ran after him. Halfway to our grandparents' house, I heard the sound. We both stopped in our tracks. I yelled to him, "What was that?" And he excitedly replied, "That's the sound I heard. That's it." I heard a lot of strange sounds growing up in the deep woods over the years. Elk mating calls, grouse beating their wings, coyotes, etc. But never anything like this. I can't really describe the sound, except that it was a high-pitched tone from a living thing. It was very resonant, powerful, and well-controlled in its execution. It made the hair stand up on the back of my neck. Soon, whatever it was out there in the woods ahead of us made the sound again. This time, for a much shorter duration and slightly broken. Another period of silence, other than the dogs going nuts. We continued running towards our grandparents' house. We soon arrived where the dogs were. Our dog was standing next to our grandparents' dog, which was tied up. They were both looking and barking into the forest, in the direction we had heard the sound coming from. I had never seen them bark like this, not even at bears. All of a sudden, we heard a similar sound come from a completely different direction on the woods, of the opposite side of us. Immediately, the call was answered by another loud report, where we originally heard the first sound. Whatever was out there, there seemed to be two of them, and they seemed to be communicating. So we continued to listen. Nothing for a minute or two. Then we heard two more distinct calls, this time from the same general direction in the woods, yet separated. They were now coming from a farther distance. Again, they seemed to be replying or communicating with one another. We still continued to listen for several more minutes, but the sounds did not occur again. We told our family members about it, but nobody really paid much attention, as they had not heard the sounds, and since we lived right in the middle of an area used by bears and other animals to travel through the wilderness regularly. The tribe caught 7 bears in one summer, using live bear traps near our house. They probably assumed it was just a normal animal, out in the woods. In any case, I have never forgotten the incident, and often think of the surreal event every time I go back to the wilderness. Oh, I did not mention this, but I did have another experience with a close friend the following year, in 1990, involving what we believed were Bigfoot tracks. When we told her about the incident, my friend's grandmother, who was in her late 80s and had lived in the location where we saw the tracks her whole life, she relayed a story about how she and her husband had seen a Sasquatch in that area over 20 years ago.